There's a land of boundless beauty where the untamed rivers run.
A montage of mountains, rivers, and forests.
Snow-capped mountains rise to meet the morning sun. There are silent, sunlit valleys, undiscovered, unexplored. It's a home for free of spirit. It's a land called Labrador.
A ripple of water near an ocean shore. Narrator.
You start a ripple and you just have to let it go. And you have to trust it in some ways. Your obligation, and I feel our obligation, was to start the ripple. And do it in such a way that there is power in that. Energy is released. And that energy is taken up. You have faith and trust that that energy then is going to end up somewhere else. And you don't always know where it's going to end up.
The Building Links Among Women project was created to foster and support an alliance among women to share knowledge and experiences and to take action related to the impact of resource development on women, their families, and their communities.
Women hold hands in a circle. Then Labrador community leader Patrina Beals.
Labrador. And our women, we don't need anyone to speak for us, but we need women to help get people to listen to us.
Deborah Steenstra of Fem North Net.
As Fem North Net in northern Manitoba and Thompson, in Labrador West and Labrador, and in Happy Valley Goose Bay. And the women in Happy Valley Goose Bay, Labrador, identified Muskrat Falls as a major change in their lives. Fem North Net is looking at how economic developments and especially resource extraction affects the lives of women in communities and how they can engage in change related to the decisions that transform their communities.
Project manager Barbara
Everybody who lives
Clow.
in Happy Valley Goose Bay is going to feel the impact of the Muskrat Falls development. Some of them are going to make a lot of money. Some of them are going to, get a job they didn't have before. Some of them are going to lose their traditional lands. And that amongst all of those people, women and children are amongst the most, well, I say vulnerable. Deborah tends to say excluded or marginalized, and I think you get the sense from those words that they're the people who are most likely to suffer in these circumstances. So that was kind of our focal point, was trying to understand what this really looks like for women and how women's voices and women's needs are just starkly absent from discussions about resource development.
A meeting room.
Women are afraid to speak out in general because their voices are not welcomed in lots of places. And if you say something in a way that someone is uncomfortable with, which they think is not quote unquote feminine, you're criticized regularly for those kinds of things. And I think what I hope the project will do, and what I think it has already begun to do, is to help women realize that they're not alone.
Project lead Gail Bakey.
At the Happy Valley Goose Bay site, we decided to focus on the a particularly relevant and pertinent situation right now, which is the development of the Lower Churchill River, a hydroelectric development on the Lower Churchill at Muskrat Falls. It's a project we call Claiming Our Place, Women's Relationship with Rivers. And it was an attempt to engage women, a lot of local women who aren't engaged otherwise and whose voices aren't being heard. The project was a partnership with the community, and Patrina Beals was our community lead. She was the executive director with the Mokami Status of Women at the time. So thinking about the project and the women we wanted to engage, women that were otherwise fairly marginalized in the community, women who were likely to really experience the greater amount of the impact of the development and less likely to experience the benefits. This was the group of women that we really wanted to connect with. And so we knew there was going to be quite a challenge, really, in engaging those women. I went to a workshop in which Jeanette Kavanagh was facilitating. Her method is an Indigenous Aboriginal process. It involves Indigenous method of storytelling. People tell stories. The stories are then collectively considered for themes, and then take those themes and they develop creative ways to express those themes, those ideas, then bring those creative pieces to a showcase, a performance that's done before an audience. Jeanette was very enthusiastic, and it turned out to be just an ideal fit. Goose Bay is unique in that it is probably the only community that has a significant population of all the various groups, cultural groups in Labrador. So you have Inuit, northern Inuit, you have long-term settler populations as well as newcomer populations, and all in the one community. And while historically there have been certainly good relationships among various populations, in more recent times there's been a lot of tension and disconnect. We realized one of the challenges was that to bring people together who come from different experiences and cultural and political contexts. And Jeanette's facilitation, her process was very much about, helped us get people together and coming together in commonalities.
Scenes of Jeanette's interactive workshop.
We all used to get along, yeah. Well, this brings us around full circle, because in our first session of the Claiming Our Place project, we had another very significant elder, Innu elder, as part of that phase of the project. And she, when we were talking about the various groups and some of the tensions that currently exist, the various cultural groups, and she made the observation, we used to get along. And she talked about how my Inuit grandfather and her Innu father, were good friends. And she said, what happened? What happened that our various groups, we don't get along anymore? And I thought about it too, and I said, it's some of what's gotten in the way has been these big economic development initiatives. So it started with the militarization of Goose Bay, and then and the development of Churchill Falls, and all of these things seem to have done something with our relationships. And so it just occurred to us that it was so important that it was women coming together to try to rebuild the relationships and to counteract this effect, this disruption of relationships that seemed to be going along with major economic development activities.
Gail meets with Deborah and Barbara.
So when Deborah proposed making some connection with Nova Scotia women, it really was the right time to think about something like that. It really was another ripple in the pool and ripple effect that we had started with the women in Labrador.
Deborah.
So I applied to the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council for some funds to facilitate a tour of women from Nova Scotia, sharing knowledge with women in Labrador. That would raise the interest and the awareness of being in a relationship as a result of being one of the recipients of the hydroelectricity from Labrador through Muskrat Falls development and the Maritime Link to Nova Scotia.
Narrator.
In 2014, women from Nova Scotia traveled to Labrador to have meaningful conversations and dialogue about resource development in Atlantic Canada. It was an eye-opener for all, and for many, their first time traveling to a northern community.
The women are coming, the women are coming, the women are coming. Oh woman, oh what can she be? Wherever she is necessary.
Scenes of the women trekking through a forest, then looking down at a rushing river from atop a cliff.
Oh woman, oh, what can she be? Wherever she is necessary. Ah, 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 ah.
For 4 days, the women met, traveled around the surrounding communities, visited Muskrat Falls, and observed the construction and development taking place around them. There is considerable support for this project in Newfoundland, Labrador, and Nova Scotia for several reasons. First, hydroelectric power is a cleaner alternative to burning oil, gas, and coal. Second, supporters contend that the development has the potential to create a secure and sustainable source of energy for the Atlantic provinces.
The project under
The
construction.
project promises to create many new jobs, a welcome change in a region with some of the highest unemployment and poverty rates in the country. As much as we want and need clean, renewable energy, we cannot ignore the impact the project will have on the land, the communities, and the people of Labrador. The Labrador Island Link and the Maritime Link portions of the project include installing thousands of kilometers of subsea cable and overhead transmission lines and constructing a number of transmission stations to deliver electricity from Labrador to Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, and beyond.
Gail.
Although Labrador has been associated with the island of Newfoundland, it really has had its own identity for forever. You know, geographically distinct from the island, it's culturally distinct, it's had distinct history, and developed its own flag. And the flag really is representative, of course, of that identity and that legacy. So the blue represents the water, and the green is the land, the white the snow, and the spruce twig the trees, of course. So it's very, it's the land. Land is the identity. The land is the identity, yeah.
A beach campfire.
We come here every Mother's Day.
Labrador resident Nancy Hamill.
We have a barbecue, a fire, and we spend a day here. When you see all the devastation, how can this be green energy? Really? And this is the power line right now that they're servicing across the power to the construction site.
The area has been clear-cut.
That's not a big space from there to there. And the pressure that's going to be on this land once that's backed up with water. That's one of my concerns, is the pressure. This is not a whole lot of land. If you got this quick clay in pockets underneath this,
She pushes her toe
can get
against the quick clay.
those falls are going to be no longer there. They're going to be all underwater. That's all going to be flooded. So there will be no more falls.
Silencing the water.
Gail looks out at the river.
Like when you live in a place and you don't bother to go somewhere because it's always going to be there. But now you realize it's one of those things that's not going to be there after so long. I almost wish I had made more trips so that I had known the falls that my grandfather knew.
Nancy.
This is the portage where canoes would come up on this side, and this is where they would cross and go to the other side of the falls.
Narrator.
Damming the lower Churchill River will destroy thousands of hectares of land, permanently damaging the environment and altering the way of life that Labradorians have known for many generations. The community nearest to Muskrat Falls, Happy Valley Goose Bay, is also likely to suffer socially and economically. For example, there is no guarantee that local residents will benefit from job creation. Skilled workers are likely to move to the community, at least temporarily, to take up jobs, and the women of Labrador, like women elsewhere, are vastly underrepresented in the trades.
The businesses and homes in Happy Valley.
We also know from experiences elsewhere in Canada that the influx of workers in the community will strain infrastructure and services. Housing and other prices will soar beyond the reach of many, while goods and services may also be unavailable or inaccessible. By comparison, most Nova Scotians will be spared the negative effects of resource development because current plans for construction are confined to a single transmission station in Point Oconee, Cape Breton.
Map of Point Oconee.
But many in both provinces will be adversely affected by increased power rates, and women are particularly at risk because they are more likely than men to experience multiple barriers to economic and social well-being.
A drive-by view of the large
There's a lot
Royal
of,
Canadian Air Force Base.
Things that don't make sense for people
Gail.
from a community-wide perspective. And one of them is on the base, the federal government owns all these houses, military houses, that are lying empty because of the downsizing of the base. And it's been a long time that there's been discussions about what to do with this housing. At the same time, the community is in a housing crisis, a need for low-income housing. The Lower Churchill development has caused a significant increase in housing costs, so a lot of people can't afford houses. There's even more of a demand for housing. There's even homelessness, which we hadn't seen before. In my lifetime, this is a very new phenomena in Labrador. And yet these houses are not available to people and in good shape. Yeah.
Deborah.
Who gets the benefits of all of that and who pays the costs of all of that? And I understand that across the world there is an unequalness and we often see it. So part of my question in this project was, so there is a hydroelectric project being built in Labrador that has been pitched as providing jobs to Newfoundlanders and possibly Labradorians, to have benefits to the Newfoundland Labrador government, to possibly providing some benefits once the Indigenous peoples asked for it and fought with the governments for that, to some of the Indigenous people. But in Nova Scotia, as recipients of the hydroelectricity that would come from Muskrat Falls, the conversation was primarily around green energy and how important it was to have better types of energy that wouldn't harm the environment. There was no discussion about, so who's paying for this? Not in money terms, but in cultural terms, in land use terms, in changes in lifestyle and things like that. So we have a moment in time with the Muskrat Falls and with the Maritime Link to begin to understand what those relationships are, who benefits and who doesn't benefit, and to ask the question, are we in good or right relationship, right? Are we in relationships that we feel are honorable? Are we in relationships that we don't think are exploitative or oppressive? Like, are these relationships we are proud of? My friend and colleague Gail talks about fast track to urbanization, and I think that's a really important piece to recognize as a cost.
Gail's presentation.
Labrador is a large territory, larger than the island of Newfoundland and all the Maritimes put together.
Gail.
Goose Bay was built because of the World War II and the militarization of the region. And before that, people were just subsistence hunting and fishing or trapping for the Hudson's Bay Company. That was what was happening up to the 50s. And Goose Bay didn't exist until then. And it was militarization that was a major change, economic development-wise, change in the region. And that was the first wage labor that occurred for people. The Churchill Falls being built shortly after that. So that was a marked major change in the economy. And one of the things that wasn't taken into an account by the proponents for the Muskrat Falls development was the cumulative effects of these different developments on the community. So the fact that you had major changes happening with the military being brought into and developing in the region in the 50s and 60s, then the Churchill Falls development, 60s and 70s, then the Boise Bay development happening. So things happening really fairly quickly to major changes in a society, not taken into account as having a major impact in the overall community and life of people. That's of concern, you know, that kind of change is not accounted for. Maybe it wouldn't have the same significance down south, but the context in the north is different.
Barbara.
So we asked many of those people to come together and share their thinking around women's issues in general. So, for example, we had Michelle Cohen, who's the equity lead for the Canadian Union of Public Employees, join us.
Michelle.
I was really struck by being at Muskrat Falls and thinking about overconsumption in the south and the price that women pay in the north, particularly in terms of violence that it brings, not just for the environment, but actually their physical well-being. So I think I'm really left with that.
Barbara.
So she was able to talk a lot about what women's place is in the labor movement, but also in the labor marketplace, and therefore to be able to unpack more for folks why they are more vulnerable and why we need to pay more attention to them. It's not just enough to say, as governments are, oh, we're making jobs, we're creating jobs, or we're creating jobs for women even. She would say, but you have to understand that women won't be able to compete easily in this particular marketplace because they're vastly underrepresented in the trades, plumbing, electricity, all that kind of stuff, which are going to be the main things, construction, that are being tapped into in the actual building of the Muskrat Falls Dam and the transmission lines. And we had Kat Abreu, who's with Ecology Action Center, talking about bringing a really brilliant analysis of the environmental issues.
Kat Abreu.
Thinking about the fact that we have a lot of difficult choices and there are never easy answers. And the analysis that I've developed about this project is a really complex one, and it's one that's caused me a lot of turmoil and pain, because I think about the fact that coal burning for electricity in Nova Scotia is already impacting people here. That the coal we use to generate electricity in Nova Scotia is mined in South America, in places where people suffer to develop that resource.
Scenes of the construction
I
site.
think about all of these things, and the role that a hydroelectric dam like Muskrat Falls could play in changing this region, and reconciling that with the destruction that I know comes along with that project has always been a source of incredible difficulty for me. And I actually am very grateful to have been able to go to this place and to now deeply feel the grief of it.
Barbara.
Very complex, very nuanced to say, we're going to have to make choices here going forward. But we could all then say, the women's advocates and the women's researchers would say, okay, great, but can we make this next step one that doesn't hurt people or keeps the harms and the hurts to a minimum?
At a workshop, Inuit elder Sarah Anala beats a drum. Voiceover, Gail.
It's part of building links that our elder Sarah Anala was able to join us for one of the sessions. She's a well-respected elder leader for Nunatsiavut. She's also part of the women's group with the Nunatsiavut government. And she's provided an added layer to the work we were doing from some spiritual guidance, I think, that was so important for us to have.
Sarah moves around a circle of sitting women, shaking hands with each of them.
What I wanted the participants to realize was the traditional Labrador. I talked about Goose Bay as being fairly recent. It was developed as a military town. Well, Northwest River and Mud Lake are very traditional Labrador towns.
Views of both towns.
Northwest River being 250-odd years old as a Hudson's Bay trading post community. Mud Lake being fairly similar in terms of the length of time that it's been a place where people have lived. The territory has been used by Indigenous peoples, for eons. The Inuit have been using it as well with, like my own grandfather being a trapper in the region. The Innu for a long time have gone far inland in that region, trapping and hunting, and through western Labrador into Quebec, and only settled into communities in the 60s, and Shashashi being one of the communities. Recently they, as part of the go-ahead for the Lower Churchill development, the Innu were able to negotiate a land claims agreement, the New Dawn Agreement, and as a result have of that agreement have resources, significant resources, and we went to Shashashi as part of the tour, and I think we're able to see some of the changes that are happening in that community, as well as some of the circumstances of poverty and detriment as well that the community has been living with since they became a community, since the 60s, because that was the state of the community for many years, a lot of poverty, detriment, and still is. But it was interesting, we were driving around the community and this is what we were seeing, and then we turned a corner and we ran into this beautiful, beautiful modern subdivision, and all these kids out on bikes and riding around, and the families, parents out talking to each other, and this was a new thing for me. I hadn't seen, even though I'm from that Northwest River next door, and have worked in Shashashi many times as well, this was new for me to see, and it was just thrilling. It was thrilling to turn that corner and thinking, the community's turned a corner. There's all that poverty and detriment, and then there's this possibility and these beautiful homes and these family life and happy kids. So I realized, you realize from that, and this is why it was important for the tour as well, that the agreement that the Innu made that paved the way for the Lower Churchill also paves the way for this possibility for the community. This possibility for some prosperity and for some opportunity that after such despair and detriment. But it comes at a cost as well.
A beach, then overview of the water.
Comes at a cost, and we've been talking about some of those costs in our work, and certainly had women from Shashashi Innu women talking about some of those costs. And some of those costs for them as well have been about not having access to some of the land that they were used to accessing, not being able to get to some of the places because it's been barred off, or being very concerned about impacts to identity because of the disconnect now from the land that's happening, that lack of relationship from the land that happens with development. It's vital, and being very scared what that means now with the disruption in that relationship. Yeah.
What I saw.
The workshop. Nova Scotia resident Sheila Francis.
And so we were driving around, and then when we got to the school and all these new houses, it's like, wow. And then I've noticed that in communities, it's, and we go back to haves, have-not, rich versus poor type of thing. It's the developed areas are always separated. Mm-hmm. You don't have the developed, with the things that have been there. So when we were driving around, looking around, and I started thinking, these people that are in the original or the first part of the community, they have already been left behind. Mm-hmm. How much more further are they going to be left behind? Mm-hmm. Because they're focusing on development where the school is. And then I was also thinking, well, geez, Aboriginal people have always accommodated people onto their lands.
Nova Scotia resident Lynn Jones.
Too, is joining
communities, I was thinking of points about the Black community, African Nova Scotian community. What would they think if they came here? Because we live in little communities on the edges of things and marginalized, and the racism and all these other things. What would they think? Or how would they feel if they came here and saw, observed, shared stories? Like, what would happen? I don't know as a result of that.
Photos of women at a dock. Narrator.
Some of the participants were invited to visit a small community only accessible by boat, Mud Lake. It was a step back in time.
Gail.
Mud Lake really represents a traditional Labrador community that's changed very little over time.
Rustic homes within forested
but
areas.
Is potentially going to be very significantly impacted by what's happening with the Lower Churchill. Because it's a little community that's next to Goose Bay, and it's a very small population, 100 and something people, it's not paid much attention to.
A small church near a bridge.
But in terms of the essence of Labrador, it's significant. It's significant, and it needs to be profiled, and it needs to be paid attention to. It's the essence of Labrador. And why I say that, for instance, one of the markers of that is you go into Mud Lake and it's houses in the wilderness. It isn't it's very integrated. The houses are integrated into the wilderness. It isn't separate from the wilderness. It has that that connection to the land sense, for instance. One of the major, the major potential is if the dam were to fail, the whole community of Mud Lake would be gone, annihilated.
A schoolhouse.
The other things that are happening even now are changes to the river. The dam will change how the ice is formed, and as well as changes to the silt in the river, so that navigation issues will become an issue. So just as an example in terms of impact on women, I talked to a few women who have been able to navigate the river themselves. So they go back and forth to Goose Bay, which is not that far away, using their own boats, but lately have been getting stuck. So one of the impacts to these women is their independence and their safety in navigating the river. When you talk about women's power and women's ability to be part of the land and part of life and in Labrador, just that impact alone is, I think, a significant change, which a lot of people wouldn't pay attention to and don't see as significant.
Kat Abreu.
Like in so many other areas of this project, there was just a real failure of communication with the community of Mud Lake, and no one ever spoke to them about what this project meant, would mean or might mean for the community, and what kinds of risk avoidance measures were being taken to ensure that Mud Lake was safe, and how the people of Mud Lake could respond if there was some kind of emergency situation. I feel like that conversation just hasn't happened. And for that reason, it's very understandable that the community of Mud Lake is concerned and asking questions.
Barbara.
So there are many layers of that. The women in Labrador felt alone, like isolated from each other, not talking to each other. That's a key component of the work that Gail has been doing, is sort of saying, there are other folks out there, other women out there, similar experiences, similar cares, similar values, or not always, but let's have a conversation around that. So I saw that happen, where people who didn't know that, folks from Nunatsiavut and folks from Nunatuhavut and folks from, the Innu populations all had cares and concerns around these issues. So that was amazing just to watch that happening.
At the workshop, Nova
And
Scotia
I wonder
resident
if
Dee
your
Campbell.
town has, as part of their vision statement, because of this transient population, that they include in their vision statement a commitment to how women should be treated, an expectation of the dignity, the honor, the respect of women is foremost in how the town expects people to behave. And that you really promote that the mayor and council by name are supporting you, have met with you, and that you keep connecting their name to it.
Labrador resident Johanna Tuglavina.
Childcare came up as one of the priority issues to women's lack of economic security in the community. Able to connect with Mona and Michelle here, and we're talking about getting Mona and Michelle to name so that we could train women in the community about how to best offer childcare services, because they both, or Mona has extensive background in the field of early childhood education. So we're going to talk a lot between myself, Michelle, Mona, and Jenny Lyle to get childcare training in the community. So that would help increase women's economic security, or give them the freedom to pursue job opportunities if they so wish. And that would kill two birds with one stone, create more freedom for women to be able to pursue jobs, and also meet a demand in the community. Yeah, we also discussed some of the major impacts in this community, how women and men, not only women, how women and men are becoming prostitutes to support their drug addiction, and how some heavier drugs are being introduced to this community. So we have to consider how the influx of people introduces different problems to the communities where there was none before.
D.
We have a few things, but the first thing is that we felt that there was a very strong sense that information is not being communicated very well, that there's a strong need for like knowledge translation activities or environmental education about the project information, details that are in the EA that maybe information details that might have been miscommunicated, not very clear. We want to know, is the municipality engaging at all with Nalcor on Gull Island? Did the municipal government make demands on Nalcor that failed? Like, we didn't get a sense that there's any impact benefit agreements or formal negotiation or engagement with Nalcor. And then the women were telling us that there's this inevitable, it seems, 25% increase that they're anticipating in electricity rates. The impacts on the country foods, like people are very afraid of mercury poisoning and the tordon poisoning. And so if they can't access what they use to supplement their food needs, and the cost of living's going up, are there plans in place to sort of offset some of those impacts? And then updating the downstream effects from what we already know from the Upper Churchill project, because now you're moving that downstream.
Cat.
Specifically, I think in talking to the mayor, having a real sense of what kind of communication happens between mayor and project proponent, or municipal council and project proponents, and how that communication then gets filtered down to the residents of Happy Valley Goose Bay.
Nova Scotia resident Susan Manning.
I know one big discussion that came up was the cost of rent in Happy Valley Goose Bay. Libby mentioned that apparently it's entirely possible that for a 2-bedroom house you might be paying $5,000 a month in rent, which was extraordinarily shocking. Jermaine was telling us about the overall feeling in Sheshashi about some people are very happy that individuals within the community are getting contracts to with Nalcor and are getting income and jobs from that, but other people are also seeing this many social problems that are happening, especially with the income currently coming from Voisey's Bay. So we haven't even seen the income from the Muskrat Falls share of the royalties. So how can we deal with the social problems?
Sheila.
At the end of this project, who's going to be having the jobs? You know, where are all these people going to be working? So, you know, that's a long-term effect that I don't know if very many people have really thought about. You know, we try to live for today, but, you know, the reality is in today's society, we need to live for tomorrow also.
Labrador resident Trish Nash.
We need to be talking together, and two Aboriginal groups that are most affected need to be doing more monitoring, and it would be great if we could be talking to you to see what type of monitoring you're doing in Nova Scotia and do a similar program to bring the two groups, the two regions together. That we need to be working all together to try and do what we can do, and that is what this is all about. Thank you. Bringing people together.
Montage of photos from the workshop.
Minimize the impacts that are going to happen from this. And it's women working together for the benefit of everyone. And then when Carla and I were talking last night, I thought, when I went home I said, my God, here's a way that we could, bring this all together by involving the communities, having Aboriginal groups and just people in general coming together, solidarity around the river and the health and people, and I think we could get some, good funding.
D.
Chosen spokespeople that are reflective of the community that this is representing. And so, somebody from the project, somebody from the Southern Inuit, somebody from the Innu, somebody from the Inuit, to get these women out with the academics and the researchers so their voices get heard in the conferences and the workshops, and look for opportunities to bring the women to where they need to be heard.
Michelle.
Think about maybe bringing some of the women that will be affected by Muskrat Falls to Boat Harbor and to see the project.
Barbara.
Over the course of the 4 or 5 days we spent together, there was these precious moments where one person would say, I get why I'm here, Sheila Francis from Pictou Landing First Nation, they've been having ongoing battle with the Nova Scotia government around the contamination of their lands and environment from the nearby pulp and paper mill. Loads of experience, and they're engaged in this great project. And even in the first 2 days, since I don't know why I'm here, and then she went, okay, I get why I'm here. And that was just, for me, it made the whole, everything that we'd done up until that moment feel right and good and worthwhile. And there were other people similarly who said things like, I had no idea that this was going to change my life.
Lynn.
I know when I get together with women's groups that I have a tendency to get really involved because I see the power of women and a need to want to be a part of what's taking place.
Deborah.
Me and my young girl self got to go outside and play with Leila and Charlene. And we made a house for the fairies. And we made a house because those of you who know about fairies know that fairies like things from the earth. They don't much like our garbage. And so we made a house out of good Labrador soil and rocks. And a ladybug came and we had leaves. And those two 7-year-old girls came into my heart, and as did each one of you. And I know that that connection is going to last my lifetime and their lifetime. And my Aboriginal sisters have taught me it's not just for this generation, it's for generations to come. We can make change and transform by being together for the future. And I'm going to be curious to see what Leila and Charlene's future is because we came together.
Labrador resident Denise Cole.
And I didn't know how much I needed this. You can't get it in any school. You can't get it in any, you get it from people. And so again, the humbleness that I feel that I could share this energy and that you shared all of your energy with me, this has been an amazing, life-changing week for me as well.
Sheila.
And I am really honored to have come to your lands and enjoy what your lands have to offer. It really is a beautiful area. But I am mostly honored to have met all of you ladies. And I really hope when you come down in my neck of the woods, just come by and visit me, and we'll have tea in my patio, and we'll look at Boat Harbor. It is still a beautiful area, and we can just sit there and enjoy it. Thank you.
Susan.
To feel so welcomed here in Labrador, and to hear you all share your stories, and to be able to have some really great conversations over the last couple of days. So
Peggy Slip.
Women coming together and the power and a collective voice of women. And I'm so glad to hear there's more things going on coming out of this.
Kat.
I am so grateful. Nakumuk.
Trish.
It just reinforced my belief in the power of women. I feel like this is just the beginning.
D.
It's been life-changing. Just thank you so much for thinking about me.
Ottawa resident Jane Stinson.
And coming to Labrador is always an amazing experience. It's the third time, and I certainly hope it's not the last. The connections to people, the connections to the land, what I've learned here. I agree, it's a life-changing experience.
Labrador resident Harriet Paul.
Met a lot of new friends and that stuff and that, and hope to hear from you again soon.
Labrador resident Bonnie Earl.
And thanks for everything, everybody.
Labrador resident Sophie Tuglavina.
This week was awesome. Good to meet new people. Like doing the drum.
Patrina.
My heart is in the community. I want to see global change, I want to see everything, but I want to see women like Sophie stand there with her drum and stand proud with her drum. And I remember the first time you played it. And I remember the last time you played it. And it's not the drum, it's the drummer. You've got so much power and so much passion.
Lynn.
I'm glad to add another mantra to my repertoire about women. So now I will take that other places, which is free my spirit. Free. So thank you.
Gail.
So bringing the women from Nova Scotia wasn't only about saying, okay, this person over here has some expertise that they can bring to this. It was also about helping the Labrador women to see that other people were listening. So they could hear each other, now they could also be heard elsewhere. And that the next level is that the women in Nova Scotia could look and see that their voice echoed with the voice of the women in Labrador. Whether or not they were living in the shadow of Muskrat Falls in the end didn't really matter, because they could see the pain, they could feel the pain, they could know the pain, they could share the pain. And then the next level is that now those women, and many of them were chosen strategically as a function of where they were located in Nova Scotia and in relation to their own networks, now they are going to give voice to those experiences and that knowledge and that pain and those needs. So whether or not the world lets us talk, in this project, we're finding a lot of different ways to let women speak to each other and speak to others.
Sophie leads the group in song.
Free my spirit, free my spirit, free my spirit.
Words on screen.
Some of the impacts of resource development in the North are loss of traditions and culture, dislocation from the land, stressed infrastructure, increased social problems, damage to the environment. Some people benefit, some don't.
Credits. We begin by acknowledging our presence and work on Indigenous territories. We respectfully recognize the legacy of colonization. We are grateful to Deborah Steenstra, Nancy's Chair in Women's Studies, Mount St. Vincent University, and Gail Bakey, Assistant Professor of Social Work, Dalhousie University, for their vision and leadership of building links among women, Muskrat Falls and the Maritime Link. Special thanks to Barbara Clough in helping make this vision a reality. Produced by Catherine Martin, Fem North Net at CRIAW. Nancy's Chair in Women's Studies, MSVU. Direction, Catherine Martin. Camera, Catherine Martin, Labrador location. Additional camera, Michael Johansson, Claiming Our Place. Interview camera, Frank Clifford, Halifax location. Assistant camera, Mavis Penny, Labrador Institute, MUN. Editing, Catherine Martin. Written and narrated by Catherine Martin. We would also like to recognize the many contributions of individuals and organizations both to the project and to the development and production of this documentary. Ananaukataget Tumingit, Creative Action researchers and participants. Regional Inuit Women's Association. Canadian Research Institute for the Advancement of Women. Canadian Union of Public Employees Atlantic. Dalhousie University. Ecology Action Centre. Happy Valley Goose Bay Town Council, Memorial University of Newfoundland, Mount St. Vincent University, Newfoundland and Labrador Housing and Homelessness Network, Lands and Natural Resources, Nunatsiavut, Nunatsiavut Government, Nunatakavut Community Council, Pictou Landing Native Women's Association, Terry's Tents, and the University of Guelph. This project and documentary were made possible with funding from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council and the Nancy's Chair at Mount St. Vincent University. Copyright 2015.